It's June 22nd of 2025, and kickoff is less than 70 days away. So it's heresy that I have not already told you my Big Ten record predictions for the fall, and that's what I'm going to do today. Some items on the menu before we begin. I ask that you sit back, relax, watch as much of this video as possible, and watch it if you can, because there's going to be a lot on the screen that it would take me over an hour to cover all that is going to be on the screen for each team. So I'll try and get to as much of it as possible. There's going to be plenty in the audio, but watch the video if possible. Make sure to comment your thoughts down below. Make sure to subscribe to the channel as well and hit that notification bell. And if you are subscribed, make sure you have subscribed and please hit the bell so you can get notified when I release college football content on a daily basis. Like the video to help us get into the algorithm. Just that one like, it may not seem much, but it's free, it doesn't sign you up for anything, and it's very helpful. Check out the links in the description, including my Discord server, which is free, and also hit the notification bell for any of the team podcasts that are linked in the description. I'm not going with chalk for all of my record predictions, so there are going to be some teams who I am predicting to drastically go over their win total, in some cases drastically go under their win total. And last but not least, if I place a team in a certain spot and you think it's way too low or way too high, that may be the case, but also keep in mind that conference standings do not indicate my power rankings, power ratings of each team. There are going to be some Big Ten teams who are more so towards the middle or just outside the upper third, who I would have power ranked similarly or even higher than some teams who finish towards the tippy top. You'll see what I mean in several minutes. So sit back, relax, enjoy the show, and let's kick this off with Purdue, who I have tied 17th in the Big Ten. I'm picking them to go 2-10, 0-9 in Big Ten conference play. And yes, tied for 17th means I think there is someone else who will go 0-9 in Big Ten conference play. And obviously, I don't think Purdue will be playing in the postseason whatsoever. I don't have a positive thought about this team, except for that it really can't get worse than it was last year. And I like the hiring of Odom. I think their best possible record given their schedule, which I have as the sixth hardest in the Big Ten, only looking at conference games. I have not factored any of the non-conference. Have not done that. If you factored in Notre Dame, which is included in Purdue's non-conference schedule, they'd be higher than this in the Big Ten. But this is only looking at Big Ten conference strength of schedule rankings, excluding the other three non-conference games, just for now. I think they could go 1-11 again. They could also barely go to a bowl game because with so many roster changes and a much better coaching staff with this schedule, there is some wiggle room to go bowling. Their schedule, week 1 against Ball State, week 2 hosting Southern Illinois. They host USC week 3, play at Notre Dame week 4. They got a bye in week 5, and then from week 6 to 12, they play Illinois at home, Minnesota and Northwestern on the road, Rutgers at home, Michigan on the road, Ohio State at home, Washington on the road, and after their week 13 bye, they host Indiana. They only bring back 42% of their production and one starter from last year, and they're outside the top 100 per Bill Connolly's preseason S&P+. So when I look at Purdue here, it's going to be a rough year one. And I think that's all you can really say about the Purdue Boilermakers. We have Maryland, who I also have tied at 17th in the Big Ten, not reaching the postseason, 3-9 this time instead of 2-10, but 0-9 in Big Ten conference play. Maryland is fascinating because on one hand, I have their schedule in the bottom half of Big Ten conference strength of schedule rankings, and that's not including their out-of-conference slate. Last time I'm going to say that, or maybe not. But they play Florida Atlantic in week 1, Northern Illinois week 2, Towson week 3. That's a very easy, effortless, should all of those be wins. All of those should be wins in the non-conference. And their win total is 4.5 still. They get a bye in week 5. They host Washington and Nebraska back-to-back in week 6, 7. And then they travel to UCLA in week 8. They get a bye in week 9, and then they close out November hosting Indiana, playing at Rutgers and at Illinois back-to-back. They host Michigan, and they play Michigan State in a neutral site in Ford Field. 4.5 win total. I'm going under here. And while I like the quarterback situation a little bit with Justin Martin and Malik Washington, and I think they have some potential gamers at running back and wide receiver, I don't like the defense. The trench play is horrific. They got pillaged on the D-line. O-line also. They could go 8-4 with the talent they've assembled, with the stability that Mike Locksley has, but I think their realistic ceiling's probably much like Purdue's. You go bowling, and they could collapse and go 3-9, and I'm picking them to do that exactly. 70th in preseason S&P Plus, and they only return about 42% of their production from last year. Not a good look at all for the Maryland Terrapins. And just intuitively, check me on that returning production for Maryland. I don't quite know if that's right. Hope it is. I'll go look after this is done, and if not, I'll correct myself in the comment section. Northwestern, jumping up to several teams who are tied for 13th. There are 4 teams tied for 13th here who are 2-7 in Big Ten play from my projections. Northwestern's going 5-7. They will likely miss the postseason, but you do never know if maybe there are bowl slots that need to be filled by 5-7 teams, and academic progress will sort that out, and Northwestern's good with academics. Looking at the Wildcats here, I like what they have on defense everywhere, and I think they have some ballers on that side. But the offense is a question with the line. You know, they lost Josh Thompson to LSU. Preston Stone will probably be the starting quarterback. There's some players like Aiden Hubbard, Mac Ulayan, Damon Walters, Josh Fussell, and then they got Fred Davis in the portal at corner. All those players are defensive outside of Caleb Tieran, who might be one of the better offensive tackles in America. I could see 7-5, but I could also see the bottom fall out of the barrel here. Their win total in the preseason's 3.5, and they start the year at Tulane. Not going to be easy at all. They play Western Illinois week 2, host Oregon week 3. They get a bye in week 4. From week 5 to 9, they play UCLA at home, ULM at home, Penn State on the road, Purdue at home, and Nebraska on the road. They get a bye in week 10, USC on the road at week 11, Michigan, they're playing them in a neutral field in week 12, Minnesota at home week 13, and Illinois on the road in week 14. They return about 60% of their production, ranked outside the top 80 in preseason S&P Plus. I have it as the 3rd hardest Big Ten conference schedule, but I think there's a lot of winnable games there with the teams they get to play at home, or some teams on the road where if Northwestern can keep it close and Preston Stone hits at quarterback, they can win those games. Up next, we have also tied for 13th, the UCLA Bruins. 4-8, 2-7 in Big Ten Conference play is my prediction for them. And that, honestly, I would say is somewhat impressive given all the players they lose. They're 45% returning production, just outside the top 50 in preseason S&P Plus. They got Nico Imaliava in the portal and Javion Thomas at running back. And they have a good special teams unit, and they return guys like Sam Yoon at center, for example. A lot of upside here, but also a lot of downside, too, with how much they lose. Their win total is 5.5 preseason. I think a lot of that's Nico, riding on him, but they get a test early in week 1 against Utah, and they play at UNLV week 2. That's another test. They have a deceivingly tough non-conference schedule. They host New Mexico week 3. Week 4, they get a bye. In week 5, they travel to Northwestern. They host Penn State week 6. They travel to Michigan State week 7, host Maryland week 8, travel to Indiana week 9. That is a hard series of trips there. To Chicago, back home, to East Lansing, back home, to Indiana. And then back home for the week 10 bye, and then they host Nebraska off that bye. It's a trap game for the Cornhuskers. Then they have to travel to Ohio State week 12, host Washington week 13, and then travel to rival USC in week 14 to end out the season. 5th hardest Big Ten conference strength of schedule, again, not counting the non-conference here, not counting that in these schedule rankings yet. In my next iteration of this, hit the notification bell to get notified for that. I will try to factor that in the best I can. But this is a tough schedule, and it's another challenge yet again for Deshaun Foster. Let's see if he passes it. We have also tied for 13th, Rutgers. 5-7, 2-7. No postseason. I will say, looking at the Scarlet Knights here, I do think they improve this year. The problem is their schedule's much tougher. Last year, they avoided Oregon. They avoided Penn State. They avoided Ohio State. Heck, they avoided Michigan. And I think they avoided Indiana. They had a gift from Tony Petitti, and they went 7-5. They bring back, 71% of their production. They're one of only 10, I believe 10 teams, or maybe it's 9, who returned more than 70% of their production last year, and a lot of it's good production. Ranked 45th in preseason S&P Plus, win total at 5.5. It's juiced to the over, too. So even with this tougher schedule, I think the odds makers are expecting Rutgers to get better. I'm optimistic about their wide receiver room. I like Ian Strong. I like KJ Duff. I love their offensive line. Absolutely love it. Gus Zelinskis, Akweneba Asamoah, Brian Felter, Tyler Needham, Taj White. Lovely offensive line. And then they have some players on defense, some incoming transfers, but also a corner in Bo Mescoe, who I think can play. They could go 8-4 because of how much they return and because I like Greg Schiano's staff. But week 1 against Ohio, week 2 against Miami, week 3 Norfolk State, that's not very challenging. But week 4 against Iowa was a test. Week 5 against Minnesota, Minnesota's going to be out for blood in that game. They get a bye in week 6. From week 7 to week 11, they play at Washington, host Oregon, play at Purdue, another road trip at Illinois, host Maryland week 11, bye week 12. They need to get 6 wins because after the bye week, they travel to Ohio State in week 13 and host Penn State in week 14. Just absolutely unbelievable final 2 games. Could be the hardest final 2-game slate in all of college football. So good luck to Greg Schiano and the Scarlet Knights with that schedule, especially the ending. And Iowa's the final team I have tied at 13th in the Big Ten. Again, 5-7, 2-7 for the Hawkeyes. I don't have a read on Iowa. USC was a team very similar to this last year. I preseason picked USC accurately to go 6-6. Like, that was my record prediction, and I almost predict all their losses accurately. Almost. But then after they lost to Michigan, and I picked USC there because I just had no read on Michigan after their first 3 games, I kind of abandoned that prediction. And understandably so, USC was super flippant, didn't know who they were. I sort of feel like Iowa's that way, not in the sense that they're changing identities, but they lose a lot. They're outside the top 60 in returning production, but they upgrade at quarterback in Mark Gronowski, and they bring back a lot of wonderful players in the O-line, like center Logan Jones. And I love Ethan Hurkett and Max Llewellyn on the defensive line. I think Iowa's going to be better in the trenches this year than they were last year. They don't have Caleb Johnson, though. Still a little weak at wide receiver, and they lose a ton in the defensive backfield. Their win total 7.5. UAlbany week 1, at Iowa State week 2, UMass week 3, at Rutgers week 4, host Indiana week 5. Get a bye week 6, have to travel to Wisconsin week 7, host Penn State and Minnesota in back-to-back games in week 8 and 9. And after their bye in week 10, their November slate is Oregon at home, USC on the road, Michigan State at home, and Nebraska on the road. 7.5 wins here. So 7-5, 8-4 would be very impressive with this schedule, which I have pegged as the second hardest in Big Ten conference play. Only looking at that. I could see them collapsing and going 4-8 and 3-9. I don't think that'll happen, and I think power ratings wise, this will be a top 30, top 35 team. But I think with how many quality opponents they face, like Indiana, Penn State, Oregon, USC on the road, even their easier games like Minnesota, Michigan State at home, and Wisconsin on the road, and Rutgers on the road, and Iowa State on the road, those are going to be tough too. So anywhere from 9-3 to the inverse of that of 3-9, I can really see for Kirk Ferentz here. Something to keep in mind before we move on is Tim Lester will be in year 2, and good coordinators, and I think Lester is one. They typically have their biggest impact in their second year. So I'm curious to see if maybe Iowa this year is an offensive team, as weird as that sounds. We're finally moving on, this time to 12th place Minnesota. I have them going 6-6, 3-6. Fleck will go to a bowl game once again, and you should really peg my prediction as 7-6 for Minnesota because Fleck will always win his bowl game, and Minnesota will probably be underrated in bowl selection standings relative to their record because their schedule, while not impossibly hard, is still, I would say, pretty difficult. I love Darius Taylor and A.J. Turner. I think it's a top 5 running back duo in America, and you add in some of the depth they have, they're probably a top 5 running back room overall. Their defensive line, linebacker, and DB rooms I love. I think they're 3 deep in terms of quality Big Ten starters on the D-line. Love Devin Eastern, Moa Munde, and Jalen Logan Redding. I love Coy Parrish. I have him as a top 3 safety in the Big Ten, and that's with, Caleb Downs, Zakee Wheatley, Xavier Scott. All the production Minnesota returns is good production from what I've seen, which is encouraging. The bad news is they're 78th in returning production, and they're starting a true freshman at quarterback, which I'm a little low on there. They could go 5-7. They could also go 2-10. The only guaranteed losses on this schedule in theory are Oregon and Ohio State on the road in weeks 7 and 12. But realistically, their ceiling's probably a little bit lower than that. They'll probably lose to some teams they shouldn't lose to. They play Buffalo week 1, Northwestern State week 2, at Cal week 3. It's kind of a test game for them. Week 4, they get a bye, and then from week 5 to 10, besides Ohio State in week 6, they play Rutgers week 5 at home, Purdue at home week 7, Nebraska week 8, at Iowa week 9, Michigan State at home week 10. After their week 11 bye, besides playing at Oregon week 12, they play at Northwestern after the Oregon game in week 13. Back-to-back road games with that much travel, that's going to be a tough spot. And then they host rival Wisconsin week 14. Their win total is 6.5, and I couldn't even find it on FanDuel, and I think that's for a reason. There's a lot of unknown with Minnesota this year. Much like their rival Iowa, I don't exactly have a read on the Golden Gophers, but their schedule's about middle of the road for the Big Ten, and I think that's a good sign. Up next, we have the Washington Huskies, tied for 10th in the Big Ten, 7-5, 4-5 is my prediction for them this season. Washington, to me, is still a year away. They have DeMond Williams at quarterback, who I'm high on. Jonah Coleman, who's one of the top 10 running backs in America, I think. And then Denzel Boston's a great wide receiver, and I like what they have at tight end. But their trench play, not good. No bueno. And I think that consequentially, even with a schedule that's advantageous, I think their ceiling is 9-3, 8-4, and they could finish with a losing record. I don't think that's very likely. I think a realistic floor is more 6-6, and for context, because maybe some are confused about this, a realistic versus best or worst possible outcome. Best and worst possible outcome means for the best possible outcome, your team is at its healthiest, it plays toward its ceiling, and all of your opponents try to suck as hard as they can. That's the best possible outcome, but not really realistic. It's the same thing for the worst possible outcome. You suck as badly as possible, your injury luck is bad, and all your opponents, or most of them, play to their ceiling. And then realistic is, do I think there's a deviation from that? And if there is a deviation from that, that probably means I have some respect for you, or there's some concerns I have that prevent me from saying that your best possible outcome's realistic. I don't know. A lot of this is opinion once again, guys. They host Colorado State week 1, UC Davis week 2. They have a bye in week 3, and then they play at Washington State week 4. They host Ohio State week 5, play at Maryland week 6, host Rutgers week 7, play at Michigan week 8, and host Illinois week 9. Week 10, bye. Week 11 through 14, at Wisconsin, hosting Purdue at UCLA, and they host rival Oregon. They only return 52% of their production. They're 39th in preseason S&P+, but with DeMond Williams Jr., if he is as good as many people think he is and say he is, they can win games. They can be ranked top 25 and potentially be a playoff contender. Though I don't think they'll make it. I think their roster has some limitations. It's the same thing, by the way, with the other team that's tied at 10th in Illinois. 7-5, 4-5 is my prediction for them. Their over-under win total just moved up to 8.5 on FanDuel, and I love that because I'm not a betting man, but if I were, that would be one of my biggest plays, would be Illinois under. And I wouldn't do a huge play for a preseason win total, but for Illinois, under 8.5, I'd pick in a heartbeat. I love Luke Altmaier. I love their DBs who I can name them to you right now looking at the camera off the top of my head. You got Matthew Bailey, you got Xavier Scott, you got Miles Scott, you got Torrey Cox Jr. and Caleb Patterson. Those are the 6 players I love on Illinois. And then everyone else I either think is above average or good, like Dylan Rosiak and Gabe Jacas would be there. Tight end Tanner Arkin, running back Aiden Lowry. But then all the players besides that I'd view as kind of average, below average, maybe even bad. A lot of their offensive line falls in that category. Some of their incoming transfer defensive linemen, I think, fall in that category, at least as question marks. Illinois is a team where I think at the very best, if everything goes right for them, they could go 11-1 and even host a playoff game, maybe even go to Indy, but they could also totally implode and go 6-6, 5-7. I think no matter what, they'll improve in power ratings, but they won 5 or 6 close games last year, and if that completely inversed, they would have had a losing record. So it's possible for them to regress. I mean, think about it this way. Week 1, Western Illinois, easy. Week 2 against Duke on the road. That is not an automatic win. It's not. They host Western Michigan week 3, play at Indiana week 4, host USC week 5, play at Purdue week 6 before hosting Ohio State week 7. There's a lot of trap games and a lot of tough games starting week 4 moving on. After their bye in week 8, they play at Washington, then host Rutgers, and then in week 11, they have another bye. They then host Maryland, travel to Wisconsin, host Northwestern to end the year. They bring back 75% of their production in their top 5 there, and they have the second easiest Big Ten Conference schedule in my mind. But just where the games are placed, where they have to travel, just a lot of things in my mind don't exactly line up for them, especially roster-wise. And I think the fact that Illinois still has a lot of talent limitations to overcome. All right. Now, we're moving on to some of the fun stuff. Tied at 7th, we have the Wisconsin Badgers. 7-5, 5-4 is my prediction for them, and obviously, like many of the teams we've already talked about now, they're going to a bowl game. So, why am I high on Wisconsin? Because 7-5 with this schedule, I'm not going to lie to you guys, that would be amazing. I mean, that would be one of the Coach of the Year jobs. It's because I'm high on Fickle, not necessarily his staff, but him himself I am. I like their O-line, returning Riley Melman, and also their center, Jake Renfro. I like their wide receiver room. Love it. And then I think they did a good job upgrading their defensive personnel. I really, really think that. There's a lot of guys to name on defense, so I'm not going to go over them. Mike Tressel's a guy, and what they did in the portal, I think, really upgraded especially their defensive front. Their preseason win total's 5.5, and I get that because in my mind, their Big Ten Conference strength of schedule rank, I had to manually do this. I tried to come up with a objective equation, and it outputted Iowa having the toughest Big Ten Conference schedule. I said, no, you don't get it. Not enough variables are added. So I manually moved Wisconsin to first there because listen to the schedule. Miami of Ohio week 1, Middle Tennessee week 2, at Alabama week 3. Yes, at Alabama sucks, but look at the Big Ten Conference schedule. Maryland week 4, bye week 5. From week 5 to their next bye in week 10, they play at Michigan, Iowa at home, Ohio State at home, at Oregon. Then after their week 10 bye, they host Washington, at Indiana, play Illinois at home, play Minnesota on the road. Just holy cow. Outside of Maryland, their worst Big Ten opponent, I have Iowa going 5-7 with one of the hardest schedules in America, and a team that's top 30, and a team that's beaten them every year since 2022 under Kirk Ferentz. They have a really tough schedule, but they bring back 2/3 of their production. They're preseason top 40 in the S&P Plus, and I think that Billy Edwards Jr. is going to be a massive upgrade for the Badgers at quarterback, and I think that defense is going to just be wicked and win them some close games and keep them in some games against maybe some of their better opponents. I have Michigan State tied for 7th as well. 8-4, 5-4. It'll be a huge year for Jonathan Smith. I have them really swinging. And they have a lot of momentum in the preseason. But even when they didn't have recruiting momentum, I had this opinion because I think Michigan State's staff, and I don't think I wrote it down here, but I think it's a huge strength. It's a massive strength. So next time around, that will be in this on-screen edit, is this staff being a strength. I'm not kidding you when I say this. It is a top 4 staff in the Big Ten. And that combined with a talented QB in Aiden Childs, a wide receiver room with Krishawn McCray, Amari Kelly, Nick Marsh, a defensive tackle unit that features Grady Kelly and Alex Van Summeren, an interior O-line with Matt Golbin, Luka Vincic, and I believe Christian Phillips. Correct me if I'm wrong there. The best possible outcome if everything goes right is 10-2, but that's not really realistic. I think a realistic ceiling is 9-3. They could also go 4-8, 5-7. This is a team that has a wide range of outcomes. Strength of schedule, I think, is fourth when you look at Big Ten Conference games only, but their non-conference schedule is pretty doable. Western Michigan at home week 1, Boston College at home week 2, Youngstown State at home week 3. They have to travel to USC in week 4. That's a game I'm circling right there. They get a bye in week 5. From week 5 to their next bye in week 11, they play Nebraska on the road, UCLA at home, Indiana on the road, Michigan at home, Minnesota on the road. They host Penn State week 12 off the week 11 bye. They play at Iowa week 13. They host Maryland in a neutral site in week 14, which will probably be a Friday night game, but that hasn't been confirmed yet. They return 66% of their production, and I think this team, I am actually convinced of this. They are going to beat two teams who are better than them in power ratings or more. They're going to really punch above their weight class this year because of their staff and Jonathan Smith. We have Nebraska, also tied for 7th. 8-4, 5-4 for Matt Rule, and I will tell you, after this team, there is going to be a pretty steep climb in the power ratings. And I think after Nebraska is where the fun begins here, if you know what I mean. I kind of hate some of the picks I made, but there was logic behind them. There was brains behind them. Nebraska's one of those teams that I look at under Matt Rule, and on one hand, I can see them exploding through and winning 10 games, or if everything goes right, and then Michigan and USC stay the same or regress, I can see them going 11-1, but I don't think that's very realistic. I love Dylan Raiola. I like Dana Holgerson paired with him, and then running back Emmett Johnson, and wide receivers Dane Key, Naziah Hunter, and Ja'Cory Barney Jr. Also, their interior O-line with Justin Evans Jenkins, Rocco Spindler, and Henry Lutovsky. That's one of the better interior units in the Big Ten. And Vincent Shavers, Dasan McCullough, and Marquise Watson-Trent, I think, make a three-headed monster at linebacker. I'm concerned about their defensive line and defensive backs, though, I'm not going to lie. Thankfully, the schedule will give us a good idea of who they are early. Preseason win total 7.5, juice to the over, and their playoff odds are pretty good at plus 610, guys. They host Akron in week 2, Houston Christian week 3, but that game against Cincinnati in week 1 in Arrowhead, that's going to show us who this team is, because I don't think Cincinnati is a pushover for a team of Nebraska's caliber. They host Michigan week 4, huge game there with Moore being suspended for Michigan. Off the bye in week 5, they host Michigan State, travel to Maryland, back-to-back road games, also traveling to Minnesota after the trip to Maryland. Host Northwestern week 9, host USC week 10, play at UCLA week 11. Off their week 12 bye, they play at Penn State, which I think is a guaranteed L, and they host Iowa. This is a massive year. Massive year for Matt Rule and company. That's all I'm going to say. But I think as long as they go 8-4, maybe 7-5, although I think that'd be a disappointment with the schedule, 8-4, 9-3, that should certainly get him some honors. Now we have Ohio State. And this is where the fun begins, because I hate this pick. I hate it. It goes against my belief that Ohio State's recession-proof, especially picking them to miss the college football playoff. I hate it. I love Ryan Day. I think that he is going to win multiple natties for Ohio State in the next 20 years, and yes, I think he's going to be there for that long. He's basically said so. And they have minus 325 odds to reach the college football playoff. But I've said, out of Alabama, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Oregon, Texas, and Georgia, two of those teams, two of them are missing the college football playoff. And I think Ohio State's going to be one of those. If you pick any of those teams, two of any of those teams, I'm not going to argue with you outside of maybe Texas. And even then, I couldn't argue with you that much. Ohio State plays Texas week 1, and Ohio State can absolutely beat Texas in week 1. They then play Grambling State week 2, Ohio week 3. They get a bye in week 4, at Washington week 5, Minnesota in week 6 as a home game. Illinois in week 7, Wisconsin week 8, back-to-back road games. Off their bye in week 9, they host Penn State. They play at Purdue. They host UCLA, host Rutgers, and they travel to rival Michigan in week 14 to close out the year. Over-under win total at 10.5, and it's juiced to the under. So 9-3 with a schedule that 17th when you only look at the Big Ten games, but would be way higher than that, easily in the top half with the Texas game. And with that juice, I don't think it's unrealistic at all. I think if everything goes terribly, maybe 8-4, but that's not realistic. I also don't think 12-0 is super realistic either. I think you have to be an experienced veteran team who's deep in 90 to 95% of your position groups, and Ohio State lost so much. I mean, that team was so good at the end of last year. They lose 2 coordinators, lose all that production. And it's bold. Yes, I hate it. And at the same time, I will leave you with this. I love a lot of their players. I'm going to spend a little bit of extra time on Ohio State here. I love their players. I love Edric Houston and Caden McDonald at D tackle. But who do they have behind them? I like Kenyatta Jackson Jr. and Bo Atkinson at edge, but who do they have behind them? I like Arvell Reese and Sonny Styles at linebacker, and I think they have someone behind him in Peyton Pierce. But do they have a fourth guy? I love Caleb Downs. I think Jalen McClain will break out, but will he? And the corners, I like Matthews. Igbinosun can improve. Devin Sanchez, I think, will emerge. Defense should be good, but it'll probably take time, losing all that much and changing the guard. Julian Sayen's a redshirt freshman. He could be the next Stroud. He could also be the next Kyle McCord. And that offensive line has been a topic of debate with a lot of people, and people have said, well, Sam, they didn't give up many sacks in the playoffs. Well, when your receivers are open every 2 seconds, you'd have to be pretty bad to give up more than 2 or 3 sacks per game in the playoffs. It's a good unit, but is it great? I don't know. Wide receiver and tight end's the biggest strength of this team. And think about Alabama last year, where Alabama lost a lot. They had some coaching changes, not to the same degree, but they had some teams sneak up on them, and they were fortunate in some games to not lose more than 3, like Georgia. Georgia had all the momentum, and if Georgia's defense was a little bit more set, or maybe if they weren't as banged up as they were, they win. It's one outcome out of many. So this is one of my bold predictions, is Ohio State's going 9-3. They're missing the playoffs, and I don't think, this is the thing I want to leave you guys with, I don't think 9-3 cancels out them being recession-proof. 9-3 with the portal and with super conferences is the new 10-2. And who went 10-2 last year with a roster that was way older and that had better coordinators than this one did? That's right, Ohio State. We have Oregon up next. Oregon I have at 10-2, 7-2. It helps that they don't play Texas in week 1. Tied for 5th in the Big Ten as well with Ohio State. I have them making it to the CFP. Don't know if they'd be host a game in the CFP or if they would play on the road. And that would really determine how far I think they would advance. Because this team, like Ohio State, they lose a lot, only bring back 43% of their production. Their playoff odds are minus 265. And let's look at their schedule. Week 1, they have Montana State. Week 2, Oklahoma State. Week 3, they travel to Northwestern. Week 4, they host Oregon State. Week 5, there's that huge game against Penn State. Now, if they played a tougher non-conference slate, I would say their best possible outcome realistically would be 11-1. But they don't. Franklin has some issues in those big games. So I think their best possible outcome and realistic ceiling are both 12-0. But I also think a realistic floor is 8-4 for Oregon. Look at their schedule off the bye in week 6. Indiana at home, Rutgers on the road, Wisconsin at home. Off the bye, they travel to Iowa, host Minnesota, host USC, and play at Washington. I'm high on Dante Moore. It's like the same thing with Ohio State. I'm high on a lot of Oregon players. I love Mackay Hughes from the portal. I think DeCorian Moore is going to be a, honestly, not Jeremiah Smith caliber wide receiver, but better than Ryan Williams, I think. I love Kenyon Sadiq and Jamari Johnson at tight end. I love their offensive tackles. I love Mateo Uyunglele and Tatum Tuioti at edge. And I think that, much like Devin Sanchez with Ohio State, I think that you're going to see like Trey McNutt, Naeem Offord on the field a little bit. Same with DeCorian Moore. But their DB room is super young, and their team overall is super young. Very, 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 very young. Experience and depth matter a lot. And Ohio State and Oregon have plenty of those. But Oregon's question is, they are in a period where they're transitioning from mainly relying on the portal to now trying to build their roster and recruiting. I think their 9th toughest Big Ten conference schedule, along with a fairly weak non-conference, is going to help them reach the playoff a lot. But they only bring back 43% of their production. And when I look at some of those games, like Indiana at home, Iowa on the road, USC at home, Washington on the road, outside of that Penn State game, I can see them slipping up and losing 3 games. I can absolutely see that. No one is invincible. No one's invincible. And yet there's a team in USC who last year could not win a close game to save their life. Maybe this is my 2022 Nebraska pick. I hope not. There seems to be a team every year I'm high on in the Big Ten that doesn't exactly cash in. It was Wisconsin in 2023, Rutgers last year. Maybe it's USC this year. I have them tied for second in the Big Ten, going to the playoffs, probably hosting a game, although I think their schedule might be weak enough to where at 11-1 they could find themselves looking maybe at a road game. 11-1, 8-1. This is a pick I hate. I hate this one too. I loathe it. Can't do it. But when I look at this schedule, I think it's the third easiest in the Big Ten conference-wise, and I don't think Notre Dame in Week 8 is going to be this game that people make it out to be, because I don't think Notre Dame's top 5. They host Missouri State in Week 1, Georgia Southern Week 2, they play at Purdue Week 3, host Michigan State Week 4, play at Illinois in Week 5. Those are actually the longest travels they have outside of Notre Dame. And they're against a Purdue team and Illinois team who do not have the talent USC does and do not have the defensive staff they do. Off the Week 6 bye, they host Michigan. That's a spot I love for USC. Love it. And I also love it when they travel to Notre Dame in Week 8 because they have a rest advantage over both teams, and I think they match up well with Notre Dame. They nearly beat Notre Dame last year. Nearly. They were tied with them for much of the game despite Notre Dame doing whatever they wanted on the ground. And Notre Dame, too, is having a little bit of an identity change, replacing their coordinator, changing their quarterback in terms of style. And those are potentially the two hardest games outside the Oregon game in Week 13 for USC, and I love them in both spots. At Nebraska, Week 10, Northwestern Week 11 at home, Iowa at home Week 12, Oregon on the road Week 13, I kind of chalk up as an auto loss, but at the same time, I said earlier, depending on how things go, that's a winnable game for USC, and they host UCLA Week 14. The best possible outcome is this team doesn't go a polished 12-0. They go a 12-0 in the way that Oklahoma under Riley would have if they ever did. But I think factoring that in and the fact that they lose a lot and they're not that talented yet, I think their realistic ceiling is what I'm picking them to go, 11-1. They could also go 6-6, and I think that's very realistic. They only bring back 50% of their production, and S&P pluses them as the 30th best team. But Riley, this is what I will leave you with USC. Riley wins, including the close games he lost last year. He wins 70% of his career close games. And they had their worst QB play under Riley of any Riley team last season. So USC regressing to the mean under Riley is getting better, especially when you have D'Anton Lynn and that entire defensive staff in year 2. And we've already talked about this. Staffs in year 2, especially the good ones, have the largest impact. We have Indiana tied for second in the Big Ten. Now, much like Ohio State and Oregon, Indiana, I think, is rated behind a team. For Indiana, it's a team. For Oregon and Ohio State, it's several teams that they would be ahead of in the power ratings. Again, not picking chalk here, and I'm just going by the selection rules for the Big Ten championship game and other things, given the record predictions for each team. Those are very complex, so I can't explain them all in this video. But I have Indiana going 11-1, 8-1, and I think the Hoosiers will be better this year than they were last year. Despite that, though, I think their most likely record's probably 10-2 because they played Ohio State on the road last year. This year they play at Oregon and at Penn State. So they play double the amount of seemingly impossible wins in terms of combined talent and coaching as they did last year. Preseason over-under win total's 8.5. Their playoff odds are currently at plus 680 to reach it. Should say playoff odds there. Their schedule, once again out of conference, is Charmin Soft, Old Dominion Week 1, Kennesaw State Week 2, Indiana State Week 3, host Illinois Week 4, at Iowa Week 5, off the bye in Week 6 is Oregon Week 7, Michigan State at home Week 8, UCLA Week 9, back-to-back road games at Maryland and at Penn State Week 10 and 11, host Wisconsin Week 12, bye Week 13, Purdue in Week 14. I'm high on everything with Indiana. There's nothing outside of their ceiling because of their blue chip ratio, lack of top 100 players, lack of top 200 players even. But I love the staff. I think that if not for Penn State, this would be the best staff in the Big Ten. Their best possible outcome is 11-1 because of talent, but I also think their floor is higher than a lot of people believe. I think 8-4, 7-5 is about their floor. Bring back 62% of their production from a team that was top 10 in FPI, and their preseason top 25 in S&P Plus with no team history and no team talent. So that speaks to the job Signetti did last year. And I think this team is just going to drop one game, and it's to a guy that was able to sack Curtis Rourke to death last year. I think you know who I'm talking about. This is a pick that I loathed. I loathed, and this is something that may change in July or August when I release my rankings. I loathed picking Michigan to go to Indy because I do not think they're a national title caliber team. I think if this team reaches the playoffs, and I'm picking them to, they'll get exposed. They'll either get exposed in the first round or the quarterfinals. It'll look, genuinely, I think it'll look like the Rose Bowl did for Oregon last year if Michigan reaches the playoffs. I do not think they're ready. I think they're a top 10 team, but they're certainly not top 5, and they're going to face a top 5 team in the playoffs. The thing for Michigan that makes me think that they're going to rebound is the fact that they have the easiest Big Ten schedule. And that's not just me saying that. Kelly Ford has said that. FPI has kind of hinted to that. I don't know what to tell you. Oklahoma is the only game that makes this schedule potentially not the easiest out of all the Big Ten teams. And their win total moved up to 9.5, and I'm picking them to go 10-2. So this is not out of the realm of possibility here. Not at all. Week 1, they get New Mexico. Week 2, they play at Oklahoma. Week 3, they host Central Michigan. They play Nebraska. Week 4, Moore will be suspended for that game in the Central Michigan game. And also keep in mind, I'm predicting he'll be suspended at least for the first 4 games, or maybe he won't be for the first 4, but I highly doubt that he's going to be able to pick the games he wants to be suspended for. So I think he'll be suspended for OU. I'm going to tell you right now, it's not an auto loss, and with the talent Michigan has, they should go to Oklahoma and do to them what they did to Wisconsin in 2021. But Michigan's staff is a concern for me. I'm high on Underwood. I think at the end of the year, he'll be a top 20, top 15 QB. I like Haynes. I like their interior O-line relative to what their O-line was last year. It's a good unit. Not great, but good enough to get the job done. And I like the D-line and linebacker group a lot in terms of seniority, and I think the D-line won't regress as much as people think. However, off the bye in Week 5, they host Wisconsin, travel at USC, host Washington, play at Michigan State. They end that game streak of playing in Week 10 against Purdue at home. They have a bye Week 11, Northwestern on a neutral field in Week 12, at Maryland Week 13, and they host Ohio State Week 14. Ohio State's the only team on the schedule who's going to be close to a top 5 team. I mean, USC, I don't have them even power ranked top 10. Oklahoma at the beginning of the year could be, but end of the year, I don't quite think so, and they're certainly not top 5. Certainly not. Too many holes, much like Michigan. They just have home field advantage. Pretty sure that's going to be a loss with the staff. That's the most I'll say here. Ohio State is at home. It's the only top 5 team that they'll play. The only top 5 caliber team they'll play, and they get them at home. And I think Michigan, look, they could go 6-6, but they could also go 12-0. I don't really have much of a read on this team, if I'll confess. I'm going positive because they have the easiest Big Ten schedule. That's also why they're going to Indy. And they're top 25 in returning production, and Bill Connolly has them the 10th best team preseason with a 21.5 S&P plus rating. Hate this pick because I think Indiana would do better in Indy and even in the CFP than Michigan would, but it's just how the selection process for Indianapolis goes. If you have multiple teams tied, that's how it goes ultimately, and it picked Michigan. Not going to explain that here. That'd take way too long. We have Penn State at first. Penn State's going to win the Big Ten. I think Penn State at the end of the year will be a machine, and I think they'll start off the year like a machine. When they play Michigan, it'd be the same thing if they played Indiana, same thing if they played USC. It'd be the same thing if they played everyone except Ohio State. It's only because Ohio State's mental advantage in Ryan Day, not anything else. Penn State, I think, will thoroughly dominate whoever they face in Indy. And I think they will thoroughly dominate most teams they play in the regular season. I'm that high on Penn State. And I don't hate this pick at all. I'd hate to pick anyone else to go undefeated regular season, if I'm being honest. Outside of maybe one team from the ACC or 2 teams from the ACC, because it's the ACC, much easier schedules. But Penn State with a cupcake non-conference schedule, Nevada week 1, FIU week 2, Villanova week 3, got that bye in week 4. Oregon, they host them in week 5. They play at UCLA week 6, Northwestern week 7. Iowa week 8. Week 9, they got a bye. They play at Ohio State week 10. That is their toughest game by a mile because they play them on the road. They have the mental disadvantage against them. Indiana, they host week 11. Michigan State, they play on the road week 12. Host Nebraska week 13. Rutgers on the road week 14. I'm high on everything with Penn State. It's the same thing with Indiana. Unlike Indiana, that was limited by talent, Penn State's really only limiting factor is themselves. It's the fact that with Franklin, they only have 3 wins versus the FPI top 10 since 2014, which is just beyond pathetic. And I will tell you, picking them to win it all and picking them to go undefeated in the regular season means they will have to beat, let's see, Oregon, Ohio State, definitely top 10 FPI. I think Indiana will be. Michigan, if they go to Indy, maybe. They'll certainly be top 15, probably would be top 10 based on where they've started preseason. And then, I'm picking them to win 7 or 8 top 10 games against FPI. But hey, 2019 LSU happened, and Penn State won't be that, but also the field is going to be way weaker than it was in 2019. And I think pairing Knowles and Kotelnicki together is just a recipe for absolute success with Drew Aller, Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen, the best O-line in football led by Nick Dawkins and Vega Ione, a tight end room that will come closer to reloading than people think with Luke Reynolds, for example, and Khalil Dinkins. And then don't get me started on defense. Zane Durant, Denied and Sutton come back. They bring in Amari Campbell in the portal, who's great at UNC. Return Dominic DeLuca and Tony Roas. They bring back Saki Wheatley and A.J. Harris, who I think is going to be the best corner in America this year. Penn State's going to be an insane team. Absolutely insane. They're my pick to win the Big Ten, and they're my pick to win the national championship. And before we get off of here, just make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, comment your thoughts down below. And my power rankings, just going to go through this very quickly, word of mouth. My power rankings for these teams right now would be Penn State 1, Oregon 2, Ohio State 3, drop off Indiana 4. There's also a drop off from Penn State to Oregon. But after Ohio State, drop off to Indiana at 4, little bit of a drop off from Indiana to Michigan at 5, bigger drop off from Michigan to USC. Then there's Nebraska. Then you have, you got Wisconsin. You got Illinois. You have Iowa. You have Minnesota. You have Michigan State. You have Rutgers, Washington, Northwestern, UCLA, Maryland, and Purdue. For whatever reason, I listed them wrong in my sheet that I have for these rankings and these predictions, actually. But yeah, it's really the race for the Big Ten as to who's going to win the Big Ten is Penn State, Oregon, and Ohio State. Maybe Indiana, Michigan, and USC if they have some fortune go their way. Like one of those 3 has to face one of the other 3. Because unless it's Michigan against Ohio State and Indy because the mental edge, and even then it's hard to beat a good team twice. I probably wouldn't pick Michigan to win that game moving from home to a neutral field. I don't think Michigan, USC, or IU would beat, most likely, Oregon, Ohio State, or Penn State. I don't think so. I think there's a clear hierarchical difference there. Only reason Oregon and Ohio State are lower is because they have some of their tougher games earlier, and then there's some other matchups. So it's really fascinating, I think. I don't have the top 3 power-rated teams inside the top 3 of my standings. I have Penn State at 1 because I think they're just that insane. But Oregon and Ohio State I have outside my top 4. And instead I have the teams just below them in USC, Indiana, and Michigan finishing ahead for a variety of reasons. It's almost 50 minutes here. So again, like, subscribe, hit the bell. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all very soon.